Welcome to Euractiv Poland's Now Europe podcast. In today's episode, we'll be speaking with Neil Makaroff, director of the think tank Strategic Perspectives, to discuss Europe's industrial competitiveness, strategic autonomy, and energy transformation. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So maybe first things first, you are based in Paris. What brings you to Poland?
I'm actually in Warsaw for the Warsaw European Conversation Conference, which is happening tomorrow, where I will be discussing economic security and also how to make our industry, net zero industry, made in Europe. Because today, in the geopolitical turbulences that we are facing, it's very important to bring back and strengthen our economic security and reduce our dependencies.
Okay, so maybe I'll ask you for the answer you are going to give so soon. Net zero industry, how to make it made in Europe?
That's a very difficult challenge. Of course, we are entering a global race to net zero industries, and China is clearly dominating this race. It covers over 60% of all the value chain for batteries, for wind turbines, for solar PVs. And therefore, it's highly dominant. And it even wants to have the strategy to become an almost monopoly for clean tech in the future. And in this landscape, it's very important for Europe to build the industry in Europe for net zero technologies because it's a matter of economic security. If we don't want to rely on China's imports and we don't know what the Chinese regime will do in the coming years, then it's very important to build the industrial capacities in Europe. And for that, there are several actions that we can take. For example, we can invest strategically in some missing link for the value chain of net zero technologies. For example, I'm always very surprised to learn that in the battery value chain, the lithium, which is extracted in Portugal, is today sent to China to be refined, and then we import back the battery or the refined lithium from China. This is nonsense. While we could refine the lithium in Europe and then build the battery, for example, in Poland.
If such nonsenses happen, they happen for a reason. What's the reason?
I mean, it's a cost. Obviously, in an open competition, China is building overcapacities, meaning they are producing 10 times more batteries than Europe. And this helps them to reduce the price of a battery. Battery made in China is 32% less expensive than a battery made in Europe. So in an open market with no protection for the European industry, you can be sure that we won't have a battery industry in Europe anymore because China overcapacities will just win over the European market. And that's why having a European industrial strategy, the Clean Industrial Deal, is so important at that moment on time, because it will help us to build the industry in Europe and to protect it from especially Chinese competitors.
How would you evaluate the policies that you've just mentioned by European Commission, so competitiveness compass and the Clean Industrial Deal?
What is very interesting in the Clean Industrial Deal is that for the first time, the Commission mentioned the idea of a European preference for strategic technologies, meaning batteries, wind turbines, also steel as a key strategic material, not only for wind turbines, but also for the defense industry. And the European preference is clearly a paradigm shift at the European level, because for the first time, we will change the rule of the game to favor European technologies in the future. For example, in public procurement, when a public authority decides to renew its car fleet, then the car fleet will needs to be at least with a percentage of made in Europe in it. The same for the wind turbines. We see Chinese competitors entering the wind market very strongly, with wind turbines being 50% less expensive than a European-made turbines. We need to protect the wind turbine industry in Europe. Otherwise, this strategic sector will just disappear.
And this European preference, isn't that a preference of certain countries that are more developed in terms of industrial production?
When I look at Poland, Poland is manufacturing 6 batteries out of 10 of the batteries made in Europe. So Poland is really advanced in the clean tech industry. It's
on batteries.
On batteries, but also on heat pumps. You have the heat pump valley in the south of the country. You're also developing the wind turbine manufacturing in Gdansk. So clearly Poland is not lagging behind in terms of net zero industries. So it's in the interest of not only, so to say, the Western countries of the European Union to protect their industries, but also the Polish industry, the Czech industry, or even the Bulgarian industry, because the value chains are now made in Europe. They cannot be only from one country. They have some components connected to different countries.
Okay, so what further measures should be taken by the EU and the member states like Poland, like the West that you've mentioned, to further boost our competitiveness? Because obviously the policies, the great new regulations are not enough.
Yes, I think we need to be smart when designing industrial strategies. We cannot protect sectors that are highly emittive in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. We need to support them to transition. For example, the steel industry, it's a very important one, strategic sector for the defense, for wind turbine, but also for the automotive sector. If you want to keep steel in Europe and you don't want to basically outsource your steel making in China or India, then you need to decarbonize the steel in Europe, meaning you need to electrify steel making or use green hydrogen for producing steel. And the steel makers will tell you that they are happy to do so, but they need to be sure that they have a market for that. And to secure their market for green steel, they need to be sure that the automotive sector, the wind industry, or even the defense industry are buying the green steel that they will produce with a possible overcost, an additional cost for this green steel. And if you force the automotive sector, the wind sector, or even the defense industry to buy green steel made in Europe, then you would secure a market for your green steel and you will ensure that you continue to have steel in Europe. And this is a very strategic asset for the European economy.
Mm-hmm. France has been associated for long and reasonably so with the strategic autonomy concept and pushing it a lot and beyond security issues and defense. How do you respond to concerns, particularly from countries like Poland, that this may marginalize the role of the US and NATO within Europe?
I think it's very important to have in mind that keeping the clean industry in Europe, protecting it, and even restoring its business case becomes as vital as increasing our defense capabilities in Europe. It's about economic security, it's security as well, the same as defense security for sure. And we have to be aware that in the world of today, we have Russia, which is pressurizing us with the war in Ukraine. We have also the US now using energy as a bargaining tool. For example, we import a lot of liquefied natural gas from the US. And we know that the Trump administration is quite explicit saying that they will raise tariffs on it if we are not aligning ourselves politically. And I think it's a very risky bet for the Europeans to continue to rely on LNG, liquefied natural gas from the US. On the contrary, we would need to electrify, to reduce our gas demand, to be even more energy independent, so to say. And this is a strategic decision for the Europeans because we are living in a continent with limited gas and oil resources. And if we want to be secure and not exposed to volatile energy prices on international energy markets, then decarbonizing is the only solution. So the strategic autonomy really goes hand in hand with the decarbonization agenda.
Okay, so for listeners of our podcast and for readers of the transcript, they will think, oh, that sounds nice, but how to turn your words into deeds?
Absolutely. And this will be the big challenge now because European countries need to agree on how we change the rule of the game. How do we implement the European preference? How do we do the smart preference with lead markets favoring innovation, favoring carbon footprints, which are lower than in China? Also, how to invest in common to fill the gap of the missing links of the value chains in Europe. And this will be the most difficult part, aligning the 27 member states on one industrial policy. But I think at the end, it will be needed because we are under high pressure from the US, more and more from China, and there's not so many options if we want to keep an industry in Europe. And for that, obviously, it requires more investment, but because this strategy costs in the short term, but it's rewarding with more jobs in Europe, more industries in Europe, and more security in Europe in the midterm. So this is more an investment, of course, but unlocking joint investment at the European level will be a key topic that member states need to address very quickly.
Do you think there's a need for a new special fund to support these initiatives? Do you mean a fund or how do you see this investment happening?
No, absolutely. I do believe that having a joint borrowing for the industrial competitiveness and decarbonization will be needed. Simply because,
What will the Netherlands say?
no, of course, you have frugal countries, but you also have, for example, Denmark now. Denmark was a frugal country and now is moving, saying that the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, is clearly saying we need to open joint borrowing for defense and for industry. So even frugal countries are now moving in favor of more investment at the European level. So I'm sure at some point when the Netherlands will face a critical crisis for their industries, they will realize that you have to develop a solution at the European level. It's not time for frugality today. It's actually time for investment in our industry, in our defense for sure, but also, yeah, and how to build this strategic autonomy.
And what scale for such a fund would you recommend?
There are different numbers floating around. You have the Draghi report saying 800 billion euro every year. On our side, we did model the investment need in the decarbonization of the European industry and how to also support the clean tech industry. And the number was more 668 billion euros needed by 2040.
That's a very specific number.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's our modeling that brings us to this number. It's what we would need to decarbonize the European industry to make it more competitive and at the same time grow the clean tech industry by 2040. So it match also our needs because, of course, if you have the industry in the European continent, it needs to serve the deployment race for renewables, for batteries, for electric vehicles. So we depend less and less on oil, gas, and coal imports from abroad.
Okay, you mentioned matching of the needs and the Draghi report as well. So do you think that Commission's proposals of competitiveness compass and clean industrial deal match the needs that are being outlined in the Draghi report?
I think for the first time, it operates a paradigm shift on the European preference. Now, when you look at the investment proposal from the Commission, it's too little and probably too late. The 100 billion euro that the Commission proposed to unlock for the European industry will arrive only in the coming years, probably around 2028, while the crisis for the European industry is happening already now. So that's why probably it's on the hands of member states now to push the Commission to work on a joint borrowing. And here, the Polish presidency is absolutely crucial because Poland, as a presidency, Poland is a clean tech hub of Europe, is also at the forefront of the defense agenda at the European level and clearly could drive this agenda for more investment. So the Polish government has a strong say in that debate.
And how can it influence industrial and energy policies of the European Union, do you think?
I mean, if Poland is not pushing the EU to act, then it will probably lose its industry in the coming years, like all other European countries for sure. So Poland could ask the European Commission to work on the joint borrowing and could try to bridge a bit the different positioning in member states. You have, as I say, Denmark, Finland, also Spain and France asking for more European investment in the industry and in defense. In Germany, you have more opening now with the coalition talks of the new German government in favor of more investment. Poland is a key player that can bridge all those positioning and push at the European level the new investment plan for the industry, for decarbonization, but also obviously for defense.
Okay, so maybe controversial question for the end, because everyone now is repeating the importance of defense and security, while the Green Deal has become an insulting label. So, in your view, what should be the priority for Europe today, defense spending or energy transformation?
A very difficult question and allow me to not choose actually. I think increasing our defense capabilities is vital and it's as vital to build and restore the business case for the European industry. So I would say this should be the two main priorities for the European institutions and for member states to work together. And I hope that the wake-up call on the defense side will also happen on the industry side, because clearly you see the automotive sector suffering, you see the wind turbine sector suffering, you see a lot of key industrial sectors suffering. And yes, we need a European response for that.
Thank you. So I presume a key takeaway from our conversation would be that Europe must act decisively to secure its place in the evolving global order. Thank you so much for this fascinating conversation, and until next time on Now in Europe.
Thank you very much.